I should have known something was coming the moment she said, "We need to talk," and set down a leather folder like a lawyer. Not even a cup of tea. Just that sound, clack, as if dropping a verdict. I sat at the kitchen table, wiping my hands on my apron out of habit, although the sink behind me was already dry. Lara was never one to waste time on pleasantries. She folded her arms, her manicure flawless as always, and looked at me like I was one of her marketing interns about to get fired. "There are two options," she said, "and both are perfectly legal." She opened the folder. Two contracts. Neatly printed in that sharp font corporate people use when they want to sound polite but mean business. One was titled Residential Assistance Agreement, the other, Voluntary Relocation Consent. I read the headers slowly, my stomach sinking with each line. "Option 1, she began, tapping the first sheet. "You stay here as our live-in domestic help. Cleaning, cooking, laundry. It'll be formal. You'll get room and board and a small allowance for personal expenses." I didn't speak. "Option 2, she continued, flipping to the next page. "You leave the premises. The house belongs to Jeremy now, legally, since last year. You gave it to him, remember?" I remembered. The papers we'd signed after my husband passed. I wanted things to be simple, safe. I didn't think I needed a lawyer to deal with my own son. Lara went on. "If you choose to leave, we won't contest your right to your remaining savings. You'll have full access, but you'll need to find other accommodation and manage your own bills. We can't carry that responsibility anymore." She didn't even flinch when she said it. I suppose it was rehearsed. Jeremy wasn't home. He was at a work retreat, she'd said. He was always away lately. I hadn't spoken to him properly in weeks. Just a quick nod at breakfast, a distracted "Hey, Ma," as he checked his phone on the way out. I looked down at the papers again. Both options tasted like dust. "You want me to choose now?" I asked. She smiled, as if we were negotiating over sofa fabric. "It's better if you do." I took my time. I reached for my reading glasses, still kept in the same kitchen drawer where I used to store my husband's work receipts, and slid them on. I read the fine print. I saw how neatly it was all arranged, like I was being erased politely. "You wrote this up yourself?" I asked. "I had it reviewed. HR helped." Of course. She worked in HR. She knew how to do this without raising legal eyebrows. I reached for the pen she'd laid out next to the folder. "May I?" I asked. She blinked. "You want to sign?" I nodded. She looked surprised, probably expected a scene, or at least a protest, but I just smoothed the edge of the page and picked up the pen. My hands were steady. 74 years had taught them that. I signed the Residential Assistance Agreement. Not because I agreed, because I had just decided something right then, as the ink dried on that page. Let them think they'd won. Let her think I was a harmless little woman grateful for leftovers and laundry duties. I had other plans. When I handed the folder back, Lara smiled. "I'll get your room ready," she said. "We'll move your things into the back room tomorrow." I nodded. She didn't notice the way I looked at her. Calm, quiet, clear. That back room used to be the storage closet. No window, just a cot and a lamp. Jeremy used it for tools. Now it would be mine. I spent the rest of the day packing my things. Not everything, just what mattered. My wedding album, the old ceramic teapot from my mother, a pair of pearl earrings I hadn't worn in years, and a notebook, plain, leather-bound, with a bookmark ribbon. That would be useful soon. Dinner that night was awkward. Lara didn't join me. She'd already eaten. I wasn't invited to sit in the dining room, so I made myself a sandwich and sat on the back steps. I ate slowly, watching the sky turn to rust. I had nowhere else to go. But that didn't mean I was lost. They thought they'd cornered me. They hadn't met the version of me that remembered everything. Every penny, every paper signed, every promise broken. Let them sleep soundly tonight. I had work to do. The back room smelled like dust and floor polish. I stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. No one offered to help me move. Lara had left the boxes outside the door, labeled Mom's things, like I was some tenant being shuffled to a smaller unit. The cot was narrow, its blanket thin. The old metal shelf still carried cans of paint and a box of broken light bulbs. I didn't ask for them to be removed. I didn't ask for anything. I unpacked quietly. First, the photo of Thomas, my husband, young in his Sunday suit, laughing at something just out of frame. I placed it on the shelf by the lamp. Then my teapot. Then the notebook. Lara passed by once during the move. "If you need anything, just knock," she said, then disappeared down the hallway. What would I need? A better mattress? Privacy? A bit of human decency? No, I needed silence. I needed time. I was finally getting both. That night, the walls creaked with the sounds of a house that no longer belonged to me. Upstairs, Lara's heels clicked across the floorboards. A faucet ran. Jeremy came home around 11. I heard him laugh, just once. Then his door shut. He never looked in on me. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I always did. I dressed, tied my apron, and went to the kitchen. The agreement said I'd start breakfast at 7. I began at 6:30. Let no one say I slacked. By the time Lara came downstairs in her gym clothes, the coffee was hot, the toast ready, the eggs just turning. She barely looked at me. Jeremy followed, half-shaved and still buttoning his shirt. "Morning, Ma," he mumbled, then added, "Smells good." He ate in silence. "No, thank you." "No, how are you?" I noted that, quietly, in the margin of my notebook. "Day 1. No thanks. No eye contact. Ate everything. After they left, I cleaned the kitchen, swept the floor, washed the sheets Lara had left in a pile beside the laundry room door. Her note read, "Delicates, no dryer. Not even, please." I followed every instruction. I folded every shirt as if preparing a display. I didn't miss a single sock. By noon, I had done everything required of me. But I wasn't tired. I felt oddly awake. My body ached, yes, but it was the kind of ache that came with purpose. At 1:15, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the small table by the back door. The sun poured in faintly through the screen. The neighbors' wind chimes clinked. I opened my notebook. Page 1, terms. I began listing every task the contract required of me, word for word. Breakfast, prep, serve, clean. Laundry, collect, wash, fold, return. Dusting, Monday, Thursday. Bathroom upkeep, daily. Grocery prep, list and budgeting, no driving. Under each, I made room for check marks. I was going to follow this agreement like scripture. Not just because it would keep me here, but because people like Lara were never ready for exactness. They expect resistance. Or failure. They don't expect quiet precision. Later that day, I found a small lockbox in the garage, left over from when Thomas kept petty cash for handyman jobs. I took it. I didn't ask. I placed it under my bed and put the notebook inside. That evening, Jeremy came home early. He passed me in the hallway. "Smells good again," he said. I was making stew. I made it the way his grandmother used to, heavy on the carrots, a bit of bay leaf, pepper just so. He didn't stay to chat. Of course not. Lara texted me from upstairs. Please clean the upstairs bathroom before Friday. Guests coming. No punctuation. I added it to the list. At night, I wrote again in the notebook. Day 1. Observations. She uses me like a maid, but won't speak to me as one. He avoids my eyes. They eat everything I cook. They've forgotten the woman who paid for half this house. They think I have no allies. They're wrong. Before bed, I took the key to the lockbox and slipped it under the lining of my purse. I'd already made a copy of the original deed. I'd made photocopies of the transfer agreement, too. Years ago, I'd thought keeping those documents was foolish. Sentimental. Turns out, it was foresight. The house might legally be in Jeremy's name. But some things, some mistakes, leave a trail, especially when the original owner never actually signed in front of a notary. I smoothed the edge of my pillow and turned off the lamp. One day at a time. Let them think I'm harmless. Let them think I'm exactly what the contract says. Because while I cooked and folded, I was also remembering. And remembering, in the right hands, is a kind of power. I didn't miss a single corner. On Monday morning, I scrubbed the tile in the upstairs guest bathroom until it gleamed like a showroom floor. Not because Lara would notice, but because I wanted her to wonder how it got done so well. Perfection, in silence, can be unsettling when you're used to control through conflict. By 10 a.m., the grocery list was ready, itemized, categorized, priced. I left it on the counter beside her almond milk and organic yogurt. She didn't thank me, but she did take it with her when she left for work. Jeremy was already gone. I stood in the kitchen, wiping down the counters again, just because. Then I opened the small drawer under the sink, where I had stashed my old receipts, tucked in a zippered bag. There were dozens, some dating back years. Items I'd bought when we still lived like a family. When I paid the bills without being asked, because that's what mothers did. I added a few figures to my notebook. Utilities for 3 years. Gas, water, electric, my card, approx. $9,800. They think memory fades with age. They're wrong. Around midday, I changed into my walking shoes and left through the back gate. I always use the back now. Less chance of Lara seeing me and asking where I was headed. Not that she asked often. The walk to town took 23 minutes. I timed it. I needed exact timings these days. At the corner of 4th and Beach stood a small shop that used to be Thomas's favorite barbershop. It had since become a stationery store. I bought new pens, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to. That mattered. I passed the community center. They were advertising a free seminar on elder financial autonomy. I jotted the number down. Then I turned left and entered the cafe next to the library. The bell over the door jingled, and for a moment, I wasn't a maid or a burden. I was a woman ordering her own coffee. "Midge?" a voice said from across the room. I turned. I hadn't heard that name in decades. Ellen Sharp stood by the window table, her white curls pinned up, eyes as sharp as they'd ever been. I'd know that back straight anywhere. She grinned. We hadn't spoken in years, not out of falling out, just life and time and husbands with differing golf schedules. I joined her without asking. We spoke for over an hour. About Thomas, about her late sister. About the way people assume gray hair means quiet minds. Then she asked, "How's Jeremy?" It was the first real question anyone had asked me in weeks. I paused. I could have lied, could have said, "Fine." But something shifted. "He's letting his wife manage things," I said. "Including me?" Ellen didn't blink. "What does that mean?" I told her. Not everything, but enough. About the contract, the room, the duties, the silence. She listened. When I finished, she leaned forward. You know, she said slowly. My nephew's a property attorney, deals with title reversals and estate coercion. I didn't say it was coercion, I replied. You didn't have to, she said. We exchanged numbers, just in case. On the walk back, I took the longer route. Past the house with the crooked fence, past the lilac bush that always bloomed too early. I felt the air differently. It wasn't just oxygen, it was permission. To breathe on my own terms. When I returned, Lara's car was gone, Jeremy's too. The house was quiet. I went straight to the laundry room, folded the clothes, smoothed the seams, left them in neat piles. Then I returned to my room and opened the notebook. Day 3. She didn't notice the corners. He didn't notice the garden. But I noticed the missing signature on the notary page. I paused, then wrote. And Ellen noticed me. The next morning, a small package arrived. It was addressed to me. Lara frowned when she handed it over. You ordering things now? I suppose I am, I said, taking it calmly. Inside was a voice recorder. Small, sleek, with a clip for a lapel. Not for spying, just for keeping things remembered. After breakfast, I tested it by recording myself reading a recipe. It worked beautifully. That afternoon, Jeremy came home early, sat at the kitchen island, scrolling his phone. You okay, Ma? He asked. I turned from the stove. I'm doing what I agreed to, I said. Everything all right with you? He blinked, surprised at the directness. Yeah, just work stuff. He looked like a boy again for a second. I almost softened. Almost. You know, I added gently, there's a lot I used to handle that no one noticed. Taxes, contractors, deeds. He nodded, distracted. Be careful, I said. Of what? Of giving power away without understanding what it costs. He smiled, vague. You always say stuff like that. And left the room. I stared after him for a long while. Then I went to my room and placed the recorder in the lockbox. I didn't know what exactly I'd need yet, but I was building something, brick by quiet brick. Lara didn't like questions. I realized that on Thursday morning when I asked, casually, as if it were no more important than asking where the cinnamon had gone, whether we had a copy of the latest property tax receipt. Her eyes narrowed a fraction. She was dressed for work in a beige pantsuit, her keys already in hand, but she paused mid-step. Why? She asked. I shrugged lightly. I wanted to update the house records. I used to keep everything organized, remember? Just habit. She forced a smile. I'm handling all that now. Everything's digital. I see, I said, returning to polishing the sink. She stood there a moment longer, uncertain if she should press further. Then, satisfied, or perhaps bored, she left. I waited 10 seconds after the front door closed, then walked calmly to the hall closet. The filing cabinet was locked, of course. Lara had begun locking it months ago, after the first time I asked Jeremy about an old insurance policy, and he said, "Don't worry about that, Ma," which of course is always what people say when they don't want you to see something. But Thomas had taught me how to work a tumbler lock years ago, after he accidentally locked his drill kit and refused to call a locksmith out of pride. I had it open in 3 minutes. Inside were rows of folders: mortgage, insurance, utilities, legal. I didn't touch much. Just enough to photograph a few key documents, particularly one that confirmed the house was refinanced 6 months ago. In Jeremy's name. A loan. No mention of me. But the original document still bore my signature on a separate file labeled Legacy Deed Historical. I smiled, quietly. They'd needed that signature to make the transfer seem seamless. But Lara hadn't filed it properly. Not with a notary. Not in front of a witness. I closed the drawer and locked it again, carefully returning the key to its small hook inside the hall closet. Let no one say I was careless. That afternoon, I baked a cherry tart. I didn't have to. It wasn't in the contract. But I had always baked when something important was in motion. By the time Lara came home, the kitchen smelled like July from 30 years ago. Jeremy followed close behind, his sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "Oof, what is that?" he said, smiling. "Smells like heaven." "It's just a tart," I said, brushing flour from my hands. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said, and cut 2 slices. Lara took hers silently. Jeremy complimented me twice. I cleaned up after dinner, as always, and retreated to my room. At 8:13 p.m., I received a text from Ellen. He says the transfer can be challenged if you were unaware of the refinancing terms. He can draft a preliminary motion. Want to meet Monday? I stared at the screen for a while, not because I was unsure, but because it was all becoming very real. This wasn't just about a cramped room or unwashed gratitude. This was about being dismissed, erased, neatened into a corner like an outdated piece of furniture someone was too polite to throw out. And I'd had enough. I replied simply, "Monday, noon, I'll be there." Then I added another line to the notebook. Day 4. The walls of this house aren't thick enough to hide carelessness. Later that night, I heard them argue, behind their bedroom door. Quiet, but sharp. Jeremy's voice low and frustrated. "She's been poking around again. I found the filing cabinet unlocked." Lara's reply clipped. "I'm handling it." A pause. Then softer. "She's old. She won't fight." They didn't hear the recorder tucked in the vent behind the laundry basket. They didn't know I was already 3 steps ahead, and they certainly didn't realize that old doesn't mean harmless. Not when you've spent your life building everything they now take for granted. Not when you've kept every receipt, every paper, every forgotten kindness. That night, I slept with the window open and the notebook under my pillow. Sometimes the most powerful position isn't in the spotlight. It's just outside of it, watching, waiting. Fridays used to be family nights, before the silence, before the contracts and closed doors. Thomas and I would order takeout or roast a chicken. Jeremy would bring home a movie rental back when they still came in plastic cases. We'd sit, all 3 of us, eating off mismatched plates and laughing at nothing in particular. That memory returned to me as I stood in the kitchen at 6 p.m., wiping down the stove. Lara and Jeremy were out. Some office function, no doubt. They hadn't asked if I needed anything, hadn't told me when they'd be back. I was, after all, just part of the furniture now. I took my coat and walked out into the evening. The air was soft with that quiet coolness October brings, just before the wind starts getting sharp. This time, I didn't go to the grocery store. I walked past the shops and stopped in front of a tidy little brick building with brass lettering above the door. Drayton and Swan, Legal and Estate Services. The windows were dark, the office closed for the evening, but I wanted to remind myself it was real. This was where I'd be sitting Monday at noon, not with fear, not with desperation, with facts. Just facts. A few blocks down, I stopped by Midge's house. Not many still called her that, but I did. Ellen Sharp, my old friend. She was on the porch with her tea, wearing one of those enormous shawls that made her look like a queen disguised as a retiree. You're early, she smiled. I needed to be somewhere that didn't smell like bleach and tension. She poured me a cup without asking. We sat for a long while, not talking about Jeremy or Lara, or even what would happen Monday. We talked about the school bake sale in 1983, about the neighbor who used to mow his lawn in swim trunks, about how the hardware store changed owners 3 times but still sold the same rusted screws. Then Ellen said something that stopped my breath. You know what my sister said before she died? She said, "Don't ever confuse being needed with being loved." I stared into my tea. She added, "You were always the glue in that house, not the help, the heart." I didn't answer, but something in my chest shifted. Later, when I returned home, I passed Jeremy's office. The door was ajar. His desk lamp was still on. I wasn't snooping. I was just passing by when I saw the envelope. It was addressed to a financial advisor. Open. A draft email sat beside it. Regarding the equity line, I'll need an estimate of what we can pull based on my mother-in-law's residence clause. She's agreed to long-term occupancy as a service provider, not as a tenant. That changes the terms of liability, right? So that was it. They were trying to leverage my presence in the house to pull more money from the property. Turn me into a footnote. A legal convenience. I returned to my room, my heart calm. This wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. I opened the notebook and wrote, Day 5. They need me, but not for who I am, only for what I represent on paper. In the bottom drawer of my cabinet, under the sewing kit, I kept a velvet pouch. Inside was the last gift Thomas ever gave me, a gold bracelet. I hadn't worn it in years. I held it in my hand a long time, then zipped it back up and placed it next to the lockbox. Monday wasn't just about lawyers or signatures. It was about remembering who I used to be and showing them, quietly, that she hadn't disappeared. She'd just been watching. I left the house early Monday morning, before Lara came downstairs. I made breakfast, eggs, toast, and her smoothie just the way she liked it. No banana, extra flaxseed. Left it on the counter without a note. That's how she preferred things. Done, not spoken about. Jeremy was already gone. His car had pulled out at 7:15, right on time. I wore my gray wool coat, the one with deep pockets, and took the long scarf Thomas used to call my battle flag. The morning was brisk, but I didn't mind. Cold made me feel awake. The law office was 2 blocks from the church where Jeremy had been baptized. Funny how places change meaning over time. That church used to be my anchor. Now I passed it like any other building. Ellen was already waiting when I arrived. She stood under a maple tree that had just started turning red. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready longer than I knew." Inside, we were greeted by a young man in glasses and an older woman with a clipboard who offered tea. The office smelled like pine cleaner and quiet decisions. Ellen introduced me to her nephew, Colin Sharp, mid-40s. Calm hands. Not too many words. Just the right ones. He listened. I gave him copies of everything: the original house deed, the transfer agreement, the unsigned notary page, photos of the refinance documents, and the employment contract Lara had made me sign. He read silently for a long time, flipping pages, frowning slightly at key points. When he finished, he looked up and said, "Mrs. Harlow, this isn't just morally wrong, it's legally questionable, possibly voidable." He explained that the transfer of the house lacked full legal transparency, that the domestic work agreement could be interpreted as coercive, especially given the power imbalance and my financial dependency. "But I signed it," I said. "You signed it under implied pressure," he corrected gently. And there's a precedent for this. He laid out a plan. We could file an injunction, request an independent assessment of my right to residence, possibly begin proceedings to reverse the title change, or at least freeze the refinancing attempts. Will it make noise? I asked. He looked at me carefully. It might. I don't want noise for its own sake, I said. I want distance. Dignity. He nodded. Then we'll do this quietly, but precisely. We spent an hour discussing details. I signed nothing yet, just authorized him to begin research and prepare drafts. We'd file nothing until I gave the word. When we finished, I stepped out into the street with Ellen. The sun was higher now. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. I feel, I said slowly, like I've been underwater for a long time, and now I'm just breaking the surface. She linked her arm through mine. That's what dignity sounds like. We stopped for a sandwich at a cafe neither of us had been to in years. The bread was too thick and the coffee weak, but I didn't care. I walked home alone. The house was quiet. Laura's car still gone. I went to the laundry room and folded towels, lavender ones, soft and thick. I stacked them in perfect symmetry. Then I returned to my room and opened the lockbox. I slipped the velvet pouch inside, next to the recorder, next to the notebook. Then I wrote, Day 6. Clarity is not confrontation. It is simply the moment when you know you don't owe anyone your silence. That evening, Laura came into the kitchen as I was drying the dishes. She leaned on the counter, wine glass in hand. You went out today, she said. Somewhere nice? Just errands, I replied without turning. She studied me. I could feel her searching for something, guilt, explanation, a crack in the wall. She wouldn't find it. You seem different lately, she added. Maybe I am. She opened her mouth as if to ask more, then decided against it. As she walked out, I saw her glance toward the hall closet, the filing cabinet. It was still locked, but something told me she'd started to worry about keys. I dried the last plate and turned off the light. Let her wonder. Let her check the locks twice. Some doors don't close as easily as you think. The letter arrived Tuesday morning, sealed in a plain envelope with no return address. Laura handed it to me at the breakfast table as if it were a supermarket flyer. This came for you, she said, casual, but her eyes didn't let go of the envelope as I took it. Thank you, I replied, slipping it into the pocket of my housecoat, without a glance. She watched me a second longer, waiting for me to open it. When I didn't, she turned away and poured herself coffee. That small moment of not reacting was more satisfying than I expected. Later, back in my room, I opened the envelope slowly. No rush, just ceremony. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a typed message from someone I hadn't spoken to in over 10 years. Elaine Fielder, once Thomas's office manager, back when we ran the family plumbing business. She'd stayed with us for 23 years, even after Thomas passed. I'd lost track of her when she moved to Atlanta. But the letter wasn't sentimental. It was sharp, deliberate. She'd written to tell me something she'd recently discovered during a visit with a former accountant who used to work on our books. Apparently, after Thomas died, Jeremy had quietly altered the ownership percentages of the business before he sold it. I'd signed the paperwork, yes, but only after he'd handed me a folder and said, "Just routine, Ma. The lawyer needs everything consolidated." Turns out the consolidation cut me out of 40% of the final sale. Elaine's note ended with one line. I thought you should know. I don't like what they've done to you. I sat with that paper in my lap for a long while, not because I was shocked, but because it was all adding up. The house, the business, The way Jeremy avoided my eyes when finances came up. The way Lara tightened her voice when I entered the room. It was never just about the contract. It was about erasing me. Legally, quietly, piece by piece. But I wasn't erased. I was right here. And now I had more than memory. I had documents. I added Elaine's note to the lockbox. Then I opened the notebook and turned to a clean page. Day 7. You don't have to scream to win. You just have to keep every receipt. At lunch, I made soup. Simple, clean, no spices Lara didn't like. She passed through the kitchen once, pretending not to glance at the envelope now lying face up on the counter. You opened it? She asked lightly. I looked up from the pot. Eventually. Anything interesting? I stirred. Old bookkeeping. She paused. From whom? A woman who remembers things. She blinked. Just once. Then she left the room. That night I called Colin. I read him the contents of Elaine's letter, line by line. When I finished, he whistled softly. We're looking at layered exploitation now, he said. If the business paperwork was misrepresented, it supports a pattern. I can subpoena those sale records if you authorize it. Do it, I said. We talked about next steps. He'd file a document requesting full disclosure of financial transfers tied to the family business. He'd prepare a protective order to prevent further sale or borrowing against the house without my consent. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, but the ground was shifting. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table under the old ceiling fan. It creaked once with each slow rotation. I remembered how Thomas used to sit here in that faded armchair, counting quarters from the plumbing vans, shaking his head at every nickel spent on overpriced tools. Always keep your tools, he used to say. You never know what job they'll be needed for. Now my tools were paper and memory, and the fact that I had stopped asking for kindness and started asking for accountability. Friday was Lara's big night. She'd been preparing for it all week, sending emails, scheduling deliveries, ironing a silk blouse 3 times over. Some colleagues from her firm were coming for a dinner. Important ones, the kind who wore designer watches and used circle back in actual conversations. The guest list was 6 people. The pressure on me? Closer to 100. You'll serve drinks, clear dishes discreetly, and please, no commentary, Lara instructed Thursday evening as she set down the printed timeline. Keep things moving. This matters. I nodded as if I were someone easily instructed. She didn't know I'd served 100 guests at the church fundraiser 2 decades ago, back when she was still learning to drive in her stepfather's BMW. She didn't know how much work I could do without breaking a sweat, or how many eyes I'd trained myself to watch while staying invisible. Friday arrived, and I was ready. Hair brushed back in a simple bun, apron freshly pressed, hands steady. I had laid out the stemware, the linen napkins, the little plates for hors d'oeuvres. Not because I was told to, but because I wanted everything to be perfect. My kind of perfect. By 6:45, the guests began to arrive. Jeremy hovered near the door, greeting people with an enthusiasm he hadn't used on me in years. Lara floated in heels, her voice lilting upward in a way that made people lean in to hear her laugh. They were both performing, and they were good at it. I moved in the background, quiet, efficient, smiling just enough. The living room filled with voices, compliments about the remodel, jokes about office politics. Wine poured. At one point, I noticed a guest, a woman named Madison, with perfect eyeliner and a sharp laugh, glance over at me. Is she your housekeeper? She asked Lara, half whispering. Lara didn't correct her. She nodded. Sort of. Family, too. Interesting combination, the woman replied. I brought out the appetizers. Thank you, Madison said automatically, not looking at me. But another guest did. A man in a charcoal blazer, older than the others, eyes sharp. You've got experience, he said quietly as I placed his plate. Not your first event, is it? No, sir, I answered. It isn't. He smiled. Didn't think so. By 8, dinner was served. Chicken roulade, asparagus, something fancy from a catering menu Lara had selected but never tasted herself. I managed the pacing, the plates, the wine, the small details. Lara noticed, of course, but she didn't acknowledge it. After dessert, the guests lingered. I cleared quietly, moving through their laughter and chatter like smoke. Then I heard it. So, Jeremy? One of the women asked. How's the refinance going? You said you'd have equity ready by November. He paused. Lara jumped in, cheerful. We're close. Just finalizing things with the house. It's all about streamlining ownership. Jeremy's been doing the heavy lifting, of course. I stood in the doorway, holding a tray of empty wine glasses, not moving. Another guest asked, And your mother-in-law? Is she still in the picture? Madison answered before they could. Oh, she's lovely. I met her earlier. Quiet, keeps to herself. I assume they've set her up with a little cottage or something? Lara laughed lightly. Something like that. The tray didn't shake in my hands, but it could have. Later, after they left, Lara stood in the kitchen, sipping the last of the wine. Her voice was light, but her words sharp. Well, she said, that went smoothly. No issues. You did well. I know, I said. She turned, mildly surprised. I mean, I continued, I've hosted bigger, more demanding people before. Foreign trade delegates, state senators. The governor's wife once. She blinked. Really? I smiled. You never asked. She left without another word. I wiped down the counters, then returned to my room. The recorder had captured everything. The refinance comment, the remarks about me, Lara's phrasing. I tucked it into the lockbox beside Elaine's letter and the unsigned notary page. Then I wrote, Day 8. Sometimes, you serve with grace so that later, when you rise, no one sees it coming. The letter came on a Saturday morning, certified, requiring a signature. I heard the knock on the front door and reached it just before Lara. She looked at the envelope, suspicious. Are you ordering things again? No, I said, signing for it. The envelope was thick, cream-colored. No return address on the outside, just my full name in perfect black ink. Back in my room, I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal notice from Wharton & Blake LLP, the firm overseeing the refinance. It was a final confirmation of intent to liquidate home equity. Legal language filled the page. Appraisal values, equity draw, loan-to-value ratios. But the most important line sat dead center in the second paragraph. This refinance is contingent upon the assumption that no protected resident has claim or right of tenancy. Underneath, in smaller type, your file indicates Ms. Marion Harlow as in-house support staff. Please confirm no legal claim of tenancy exists. There it was. They were trying to wipe me from the deed, and this letter meant the process was already underway. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I photocopied the letter and added it to the lockbox. Then I called Colin. He picked up on the second ring. Colin Sharp. It's time, I said. I'll file the injunction today. Do it quietly. Of course. I'll courier the papers to their firm and request a temporary freeze on all property movements pending verification of residency rights. And the bank? I'll notify them as well. The moment the bank sees ambiguity on title claims, they'll freeze the equity line automatically. It was happening. Not revenge, not spite, just correction. That afternoon, I made my usual rounds: laundry, kitchen, hallway dusting. Lara didn't speak to me all day. She was in the study, phone glued to her ear, pacing back and forth. Around 4:30, Jeremy came home. He was quieter than usual, stiff. He walked right past me on the stairs. 10 minutes later, I heard their voices. Low, clipped. Did you know she was on the deed? No. But if she contests it, she's contesting it. Colin Sharp filed something. There's a notice on our file now. Lara's voice dropped to a hiss. She's just a retiree in a back room. This isn't a courtroom drama. Jeremy didn't answer. Silence. Then a door closed, hard. I returned to my room and pulled out my notebook. Day 9. They planned to take everything without ever looking me in the eye. Now they'll have to. That night, I didn't cook. I wasn't being petty. I was just unavailable. Lara came to the doorway of my room around 7 so. She didn't knock, just hovered. We were wondering when dinner would be ready. I looked up from my chair, where I was darning an old tablecloth. I'm not on the schedule tonight. She blinked. What do you mean? I picked up the contract from my drawer, the one she'd made me sign. I flipped to the page with duties listed by day. You gave me Sundays off. She didn't know what to say. I smiled. Small, polite, devastating. Would you like me to prepare something tomorrow? Lara's mouth opened, then shut. She walked away without a word. I sat quietly for a long while after that. Not smug, just settled. Later that night, I checked my email. Colin had forwarded a response from the firm representing the refinance. Our client is reviewing the new information. All disbursements are temporarily on hold. Just like that, the faucet stopped. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened my window, and let the autumn air drift in. My mother used to say that people don't change until they're made uncomfortable. I wasn't here to punish, but I was ready to become the discomfort they couldn't ignore. Sunday morning, I woke before the sun and made a pot of tea. I didn't cook breakfast, didn't sweep, didn't sort laundry. Not because I was angry, but because I was, for once, observing them. Jeremy came downstairs first, hair tousled, barefoot. He opened the fridge, looked inside like something might appear, then glanced over at me, sitting by the window with my tea and notebook. Didn't make coffee? I sipped my tea. You have Sundays off, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. Right. Lara followed 15 minutes later, fully dressed already, makeup, earrings, heels. Her hair was too polished for a weekend. She walked in like someone trying to control a storm with posture alone. Jeremy was still staring at the empty coffee pot. You could make it, she said. I thought she doesn't anymore, Lara snapped. Neither of them looked at me. I noted it. Day 10. The house doesn't fall apart when I stop. It just becomes quieter. Later that day, I called my grandson. His name is Henry, 19, from Jeremy's first marriage. Lives 3 hours away in a college dorm with peeling walls and microwave dinners. I hadn't seen him since spring. He picked up fast. Grandma? Hi, darling. A pause. Is everything okay? I smiled into the phone. I wanted to give you something. Give me what? A piece of paper, a gift, really. Something to help after school. Something your father knows nothing about. Henry was smart. He didn't ask more than once. Can I come see you? I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Next weekend. I'll be waiting. That afternoon, I opened the lockbox and pulled out a plain envelope. Inside, a certified check. Not massive, but enough. Enough to make sure someone in this family still had a future without manipulation attached to it. That night, while Lara watched TV and Jeremy fell asleep in his chair, I sat at the kitchen table and made copies of everything: the contract, the title pages, Elaine's letter, Colin's notes, even a copy of Henry's check. I labeled them carefully and slipped them into a new folder marked Truth for when I'm gone. Because even if I never got back the house or the money or the credit, I would get back myself. And I'd leave that behind for someone who still knew how to say thank you. I went to sleep early that night. Outside, the wind picked up. Something was shifting. Inside, the doors stayed shut. But tomorrow, I would open one. It started with a drawer. Not mine. The one in Lara's office. She always kept it locked, but carelessness follows pressure. And that Sunday evening, she forgot. Maybe it was the letter from the bank. Maybe it was the silence in the kitchen. Maybe it was the way Jeremy had looked at her when she'd said, "She's bluffing." I'd walked past on my way to the laundry when I saw it. The drawer slightly ajar, its key still in the lock. I didn't plan to open it. But I'd learned over the years that some opportunities don't return, and that those who keep secrets always underestimate the people they keep them from. Inside were files, neat, labeled, corporate. Nothing surprising, until I saw my name. Harlow, Marion. Alt options. I stood perfectly still. It was a thin folder, one sheet inside, a draft memo. Subject: long-term plan for MH, domestic resident. Options under review, transition to elder care facility, 2024. Cost offset by refinance. Quiet relocation to subsidized housing. Minimal publicity. Create grounds for voluntary departure via contract renegotiation, see HR template. Goal: minimize exposure, liability, and emotional disruption to family. They were planning my removal. Not in anger, not in desperation, in strategy, as if I were a budget item, a line to erase. I copied it, took a photo with my phone, and returned everything exactly as it was. Lara never knew. Later that night, I emailed the photo to Colin. 10 minutes passed. Then my phone rang. He didn't greet me. He just said, "You're not leaving that house." I wasn't planning to. This changes tone. This moves us from procedural to protective. They've put intent to displace you in writing. I didn't need a law degree to hear the weight in his voice. He continued, "I'll escalate. There's a court in Harrisburg that handles elder asset disputes. We'll file the protection motion this week." "Thank you, Colin." "No," he said quietly. "Thank you for not letting them erase you." When I hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat at the edge of the bed and opened my notebook. Day 11. They didn't even call me mother in the plan. Just MH. A file. A problem. A task. The next morning, I noticed Lara was tense. She didn't speak. Didn't touch her toast. Jeremy tried to read the newspaper like everything was normal, but I saw the way his eyes kept flicking toward his phone. Maybe they knew something was shifting, or maybe they felt it. I spent the morning in the garden, not working, just sitting on the old bench by the lilacs. Thomas and I had planted them together the year after Jeremy was born. I remembered his small hand reaching out to grab the petals, laughing when they crumbled in his fist. You don't raise children expecting repayment, but you do hope for recognition. And when that's gone, when you've been reduced to an inconvenience in your own home, you stop mourning. You begin documenting. That night, I slipped the memo copy into my folder of documents. Then I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote a letter. A simple one. Not to a lawyer. Not to a court. To Henry. Dear Henry, this house may not be mine much longer. But there are things no one can take, like how we made pancakes together that summer your mom left, and how you still said thank you for every meal, even when no one else remembered to. This is your reminder that gratitude is not weakness, and silence is not surrender. There is money waiting for you, not because you asked, but because you didn't. Love, Grandma. I folded the letter and placed it beside the check. Then I turned off the light and let the quiet settle. It wasn't over, but I was no longer surviving. I was preparing. I didn't rise early on Monday, let the floors stay dusty, the dishes wait, let the house creak without coffee brewing by 7. Instead, I sat by the window in my room, notebook in my lap, and listened. Not for footsteps, for absence. The absence of obligation. Lara walked through the hallway twice. I heard her stop, hesitate outside my door. She didn't knock. She never did, but I knew she wanted to. Around 8:30, Jeremy called out from downstairs, "Ma, you all right?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, clear and calm, "Taking the day." Silence followed. No protest. No permission granted. Just the sound of quiet boundaries forming. By noon, a courier arrived. I saw the van through the window. Lara signed for it, then called out, "This one's for you." I didn't come right away. Eventually, she placed it on the kitchen table. A flat brown envelope. Official. Heavy. When I opened it, I saw the court seal. Harrisburg, Elder and Asset Protection Division. The motion had been filed. The injunction was active. Jeremy and Lara were now legally prohibited from refinancing or selling the property without a full investigation into my residency status and financial rights. They wouldn't lose the house overnight, but they'd been stopped. And more importantly, they'd been seen. The paper trembled slightly in Lara's hands when she read it. She tried to act unfazed. "We'll have our lawyer respond," she said, brushing a crumb off the counter that wasn't there. Jeremy didn't say anything. His silence was heavier than her denial. I spent the afternoon organizing the documents into 2 piles, court use and personal truth. The latter went into Henry's folder, which now sat sealed in my suitcase beneath the bed. At 5, I made myself a sandwich and sat in the garden. I didn't ask if anyone else wanted dinner. They didn't ask where I'd been. Around 7, I returned inside and walked past the study. I paused. Lara sat in front of her laptop, clicking furiously. Jeremy stood behind her, arms crossed, a worried line between his brows. "She's 74, he said, low. "How far can she really take this?" Lara's voice came sharp. "Far enough to freeze the equity. Far enough to cost us 6 months of planning." I stepped away before they noticed. Back in my room, I opened the notebook. Day 12. When a woman stops asking to be seen and starts showing what she remembers, people start checking the locks. At midnight, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, made tea in the dark. The house was asleep, or pretending to be. I stood where I used to dance with Thomas, quiet little steps on a Friday night, before life grew heavy. I touched the counter where I'd once taught Jeremy how to peel apples. I looked at the hallway where Lara had walked past me 100 times without saying hello. This house was filled with my ghosts, but none of them belonged to shame. They were pieces of a life I had given, fully, quietly, believing that love would be enough. And now, in the stillness, I knew something else. Love doesn't mean staying silent while they write you out of your own story. It means remembering who you were before they forgot. Tuesday morning brought a different kind of silence. Not heavy, not awkward. Just watchful. The kind of silence people keep when they've been found out, but haven't decided yet whether to apologize or retaliate. Jeremy left early, without saying goodbye. Lara remained in her office most of the morning, doors shut, blinds drawn. Occasionally, I heard the staccato rhythm of her heels across the floor, pacing. I didn't mind the quiet. In fact, I welcomed it. I spent the first half of the day in the garden, trimming the rosemary bush Thomas had planted for me on our 35th anniversary. He'd never cooked a day in his life, but liked the way the scent stayed on my hands. As I clipped, I made a list in my head. Not of chores, of facts. Fact: they had tried to borrow against the house without my consent. Fact: they drafted plans to place me in care facilities behind my back. Fact: they erased me from conversations before they ever tried to erase me from paper. And now, fact: they'd failed. At noon, the doorbell rang. Lara answered. I didn't move from my chair by the window, but I listened. Yes, I'll give it to her. A pause. The door closed. She didn't bring it right away. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, she appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, envelope in hand. This came for you. I set down my cup. She hovered longer than usual. You know, she said slowly, we didn't mean for things to get this complicated. I didn't answer. I thought the contract would give you some structure, some dignity, better than just floating. I looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't cold. She wasn't even angry. She was trying to believe her version of the story, where control was kindness and structure was generosity. Did you ever ask me what I wanted? I said. She blinked. Once. Did you ever sit down, I continued, and ask how I felt about handing over the house? About watching you turn rooms into things I no longer recognized? About losing not just my bedroom, but my place? She swallowed hard. I thought we were helping. No, I said. You were organizing. She didn't reply. She just set the envelope on the table and walked out. Inside was a letter from the bank, formal notification that the equity application had been frozen indefinitely, pending legal clarification. One line stood out, bolded at the bottom. No further financial activity permitted until full investigation of shared ownership and residential rights is complete. It was done, not in victory, not in vengeance, but in clarity. Later that evening, Jeremy came into the kitchen. He stood near the stove, hands in his pockets, like a boy about to confess something to a teacher. I saw the letter, he said. I nodded. You could have just talked to me. I smiled, tired, not bitter. I tried. You were always looking at your phone. He didn't argue. I didn't think it mattered, he admitted. I thought you were okay with it. You never complained. Jeremy, I said gently, not all silence is agreement. Sometimes it's just exhaustion. He sat down, ran a hand through his hair. I don't know how to fix this. You don't, I said. You stop digging. That's how you stop a hole from getting deeper. He didn't speak again, just nodded. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without the lockbox beside my bed. Not because I didn't need it anymore, but because I finally knew. The storm had passed. The damage had been assessed. And what remained, what still remained, was mine. The house felt different now, not warmer, not more welcoming, just honest. The air didn't pretend anymore. Jeremy had stopped avoiding me. He greeted me in the mornings with an awkward nod, sometimes even a full sentence. Did you sleep all right, Ma? Or, the coffee's fresh if you want. He didn't ask how the legal process was going. I think he knew better now than to pretend it wasn't. Lara, on the other hand, had turned cold in a way that didn't bother me. She was polite, rigid, transactional. She left to work early, came home late, and never once entered my part of the house again. Fine by me. That morning, I sat by the kitchen window with my notebook, watching two squirrels chase each other along the fence. The rosemary bush swayed slightly in the wind. I had just written, Day 14. After the noise dies down, dignity grows back in quiet places. I meant it. At noon, I met Colin at the local cafe. I didn't want to talk law over a screen. I wanted to see someone look me in the eye and say, "You're not invisible." He was already seated when I arrived, a folder in front of him. "Everything's holding," he said. "No refinance, no sale. The court will schedule a formal hearing, but you've bought yourself time and leverage. Do we need more?" He looked at me carefully. "Only if you want to push further. We could pursue financial recovery for the business sale, even file to have part of the property title returned to your name." I stirred my tea slowly. "That would mean staying," I said. "Yes." I looked out the window. The street was familiar. The trees, the people, the slow rhythm of a town that remembered me more than my own son did. "I don't want the house," I said finally. "I want what it meant." Colin nodded. "And what was that?" "Security, respect, a place where I wasn't managed like an asset. You've proven your right to that." I met his eyes. "I don't need the title back to know who built the foundation." When I got home, the living room was empty. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was earned. I made a cup of tea, not for anyone else. Just for me. Later that evening, Jeremy came into the garden while I was pruning the lavender. He stood there a moment, hands in his pockets. "I talked to Henry," he said. I didn't stop trimming. "He's visiting soon," I said. Jeremy nodded. "He told me about the check." I looked up then. He didn't look angry, just small. "I didn't know you were planning that." "You didn't ask." He sighed. "I've made a mess, haven't I?" "Yes," I said, "but not one that can't be left behind." He sat on the edge of the stone path beside the lavender. I thought I was doing what was best, making things clean, efficient. "You were making things quiet," I said, "but not kind." He nodded slowly, and then softly. "Would you want to stay, if things changed?" I considered that. "I'll stay until Henry visits. After that, we'll see." He didn't argue, didn't push, just sat there beside me, like a boy who'd finally realized his mother was more than a signature and a casserole. That night, I pulled the notebook from the drawer and wrote, Day 14. The heart of a home isn't in the deed. It's in who listens when you finally speak. Henry arrived on a Saturday afternoon, bag over his shoulder, taller than I remembered, though he had the same gentle eyes. He hugged me like I still mattered. Not like a duty, not like a favor. Just like a grandson who was glad to see his grandmother. Jeremy stood by the porch, awkward, uncertain. He didn't try to hug Henry. Didn't interrupt either. Lara didn't come outside at all. We sat on the garden bench, Henry and I, the same one Thomas built when we still thought life moved in straight lines. The air smelled of mint and turning leaves. Henry watched the yard like it held history, not just grass. "I missed this place," he said quietly. "I used to think the backyard was enormous." "It always felt that way," I smiled. "When you're small, the world feels bigger." He looked at me carefully. "Dad said things have been complicated." I sipped my tea. "They've been revealing," He didn't ask for more. He'd always been good at reading what not to press. I handed him the envelope, the one with the check, the letter. He read the note silently, then folded it once, very carefully, and held it in both hands. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's why you're getting it." He leaned in, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I cooked a simple dinner: roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, lemony green beans. For me, for Henry, not for them. Jeremy wandered in when the food hit the air. "Need help setting the table?" I paused, then nodded. He laid 3 plates. No fourth. Lara didn't join us. Halfway through the meal, Jeremy cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, looking at his son, then at me, "about what happens next, and what kind of man I've been." I let the silence sit for a moment, not to punish, just to allow it wait. "Some of the papers you signed after Dad passed," he continued, "I shouldn't have rushed you, or simplified what you were giving up." "No," I said, "you shouldn't have. I want to fix it." "You can't." He froze. "But," I added gently, "you can stop making it worse." He nodded. "I will." Later that evening, after Henry had gone to bed, I stepped outside alone. The garden was quiet, the sky pale with stars. I remembered how I used to fear losing this place, this roof, these walls. But standing there, wind against my neck, I knew better now. They never truly had the power to take it from me, because they never built it. I did. Every brick, every quiet sacrifice, every morning I made things easier for someone else. The house was not what mattered. What mattered was the lesson, and I had delivered it. Not through anger, not through shouting, but through stillness, through holding the line when no one else expected me to. The next morning I left early, just a short walk. I didn't say where I was going. At the edge of town, the notary's office opened at 9. I stepped inside at 9:01. "Can I help you?" the woman behind the desk asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm here to update a file. I've been misfiled for too long." By 10 o'clock, I had a new copy of the letter to Henry, sealed and notarized. A second copy was mailed directly to his campus mailbox. By noon, I was home. The house smelled like toast and hesitation. Lara passed me in the hallway. For the first time, she said nothing. It didn't matter. She wasn't my audience anymore. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the notebook one last time. Day 15. They called me quiet because I didn't interrupt. They called me passive because I didn't scream. They called me old because they forgot what strength looks like after it grows tired of proving itself. I closed the book, folded my scarf, and finally allowed myself to rest. If this story made you feel something, share it. Someone out there might need the reminder: silence isn't surrender, and dignity doesn't retire.